The moment an avoidant returns is not the day your story finally becomes complete. It's the day life asks you who you became while they were gone. Because the version of you that loved them before is not the same version standing here now. You were reshaped in every hour of silence, in every unanswered message, in every night where you held yourself together. Because they didn't, and that matters more than any apology or, "I miss you." They bring back with them. When they reappear, your body remembers the old relief, that automatic reaction that wants to exhale and say, "Finally, they woke up, finally, we can fix this." But underneath that impulse is a deeper truth. The person who survived their absence did work that cannot be undone. You learned how to comfort yourself instead of begging them to regulate your anxiety. You built routines that did not depend on their mood, their availability, or their attention. You discovered that your world did not, in fact, end when they pulled back. And that discovery is not something you should casually trade away just because their fear of losing you finally caught up to them. Your instinct might be to slide back into old patterns, answer immediately, over-explain. Prove you're still the same soft place for them to land, but if you do that, you step out of the self you spent so long building and back into the one who handed them all the power, the one whose entire nervous system spun around their texts, their silences, their crumbs of affection. And you owe that past self more than throwing them back into that chaos just because the person who created it is suddenly uncomfortable with the distance they created. Protecting the person you became without them means you pause before you respond, not to play games, but to check in with yourself. You ask, "How did I feel when I was with them most of the time?" Not just on the best days, but on the average days, on the hard days. You remember the sick tension in your chest when they went quiet, the way you doubted your worth whenever they pulled away, the way you shrank your needs, softened your truths, and twisted yourself into someone easier to love because you were terrified that one wrong move would make them disappear. Then you compare that to the you that exists now, maybe still healing, maybe still tender, but more grounded, more self-aware, more aware of patterns. This you has learned to sit with discomfort instead of rushing to fix it with a text. This you knows that peace is not the same thing as having them back. This you may still care about them, but also cares about sleep, sanity, and self-respect. Protecting that person means that when they say, "I miss you," you don't automatically translate it into, "I'm safe now." You let it mean exactly what it means. They miss you, full stop. And then you ask the question that old you was too afraid to ask. Are you capable of loving me in a way that doesn't destroy me this time? And you don't answer it for them. You let their consistency, their accountability, and their actions answer it over time while you keep your center. The invitation in their return is not to prove you're still available at any cost. It is to prove to yourself that you no longer abandon your needs, your boundaries, and your healing just because the person who once broke you suddenly realizes what they lost. You are not here to be their redemption arc. You are here to honor the version of you that rose from the silence, and if letting that version lead means they don't get you back, then what you lost was not a second chance at love, but a second chance at self-betrayal that you finally had the courage to decline. Their regret and confession of missing you do not erase the reality of how their avoidance once made your nervous system live in constant anxiety and doubt. And you need to hold that truth like an anchor when they suddenly show up with soft words and teary eyes, because your body remembers more than their apology will ever fix in one moment. Your body remembers the nights you stared at your phone, refreshing messages that never came. Your body remembers reading your last text wondering if you said too much. Your body remembers that deep ache in your chest when they pulled away with no explanation, the cold space in your stomach when they went silent after being so warm, the feeling of begging for clarity and getting smoke. Those experiences shaped your nervous system. They trained it to associate love with waiting, with walking on eggshells, with never really knowing where you stood, and no matter how sincerely they say, "I miss you," that history doesn't just disappear because they finally decided to talk about their feelings. You have to let yourself acknowledge that their regret is about their experience, the discomfort they feel now that you're not there, the sting of seeing you move on, the emptiness where your constant reassurance used to live. But your healing can't be based on their emotions. It has to be based on what it actually felt like to be with them day after day. It has to honor the version of you that was tense, hypervigilant, and constantly questioning your own worth while you tried to decode their mixed signals. Because if you skip over that and rush straight into, "They're sorry, so it's safe now," you are asking your nervous system to ignore its own trauma just because the person who caused it is uncomfortable with the consequences of their actions. There is a part of you that still craves their remorse, that wanted to hear, "I was wrong. You didn't deserve that. I should have shown up differently." And it is human to feel a rush of relief when those words finally land. It feels like proof that you weren't crazy, that you weren't asking for too much, that your pain was real. But here's what you must remember. Validation is not the same as repair. Their words can validate that you were hurt, but they cannot erase the months or years where your body stayed in fight, flight, or freeze because of their avoidance. They cannot rewind the nights you couldn't sleep, the days you couldn't focus, the way your self-esteem quietly eroded as you tried to twist yourself into a shape that was easier for them to handle. And "I miss you" does not magically regulate your nervous system, especially when that same nervous system learned the hard way that their closeness could vanish at any moment. So when they come back saying, "I regret everything, I never stopped caring, I didn't know what I had," let those words land. But don't let them hypnotize you. Keep one eye on the past, on the patterns, on the version of you who lived inside constant emotional uncertainty, because that version of you needs you to remember, needs you to protect them now, not hand them back to the same person without asking whether anything has actually changed. Your anxiety back then was not random, it was information. It was your body screaming that the dynamic was unsafe, that you were carrying the emotional weight alone, that your cries for closeness were being met with distance and dismissal. And if you silence that information now, just because their ego finally cracked enough to admit they're hurting, you abandon yourself again. You choose their comfort over your nervous system all over, rejecting the truth your body worked so hard to teach you. Regret is about their pain, but your healing must include your own. You need to ask yourself what being with them did to your sense of self, how many times you apologized for simply needing reassurance, how often you explained your feelings again and again, only to be told you were overreacting. How deeply it cut when they made you feel like your longing for connection was a flaw instead of a basic human need. You cannot erase those memories just because they're finally waking up to what they lost, and truthfully, if their regret is real, they will understand that. They will not expect you to pretend none of it happened. They will not pressure you to hurry up and forgive so they can feel better. They will recognize that your body might flinch even at their tenderness, that your mind might question their sudden honesty, that your guard is not cruelty, it is a natural response to everything you endured. To truly honor yourself, you have to let two things be true at the same time. They can regret losing you, And you can decide that regret is not enough. They can miss you, and you can still remember how much it cost you to love them. They can feel ready now, and you can accept that your nervous system is tired of gambling your peace on someone whose history with you is lined with anxiety and doubt. Their confession is not a magic eraser. It is a late admission that you were right about the pain you felt all along. And what you do with that admission determines whether you repeat the cycle or finally step out of it. You are allowed to say, "Thank you for acknowledging the hurt," and still choose not to go back into a story where your body already knows the ending. You are allowed to protect the calm you worked so hard for instead of sacrificing it at the altar of their regret, because your nervous system deserves more than apologies. It deserves a life where love feels like security, not survival. A clean no with love and firmness will always cut deeper into their conscience than any dramatic argument, because for an avoidant, the most shocking thing is not your tears, not your anger, not your long explanations. It is your calm refusal to step back into the role they once depended on you to play. And this is what you have to understand. For so long they learned that if they pulled away, you would chase. If they went cold, you would heat things back up. If they dismissed your feelings, you would come back with softer words. If they acted like they didn't care, you would try harder to prove that you did. Their nervous system became addicted to that rhythm. Push, and watch you pull. Withdraw, and watch you lean in. Hurt you, and watch you fight to keep them. So their ego built this quiet belief that, no matter what, the door to you was never really shut, just slightly closed, waiting for them to decide when to walk back through it. That belief is part of what allowed them to treat you carelessly, to choose comfort and avoidance over communication and courage. Because deep down they thought, they'll still be there, they always are. When they return and are met not with fireworks, but with a steady, grounded no, something cracks in that belief. Suddenly the script they have relied on doesn't play out as expected. Their push does not result in your pull. Their message does not guarantee your heart. Their nostalgia does not automatically buy them access to your future. And that quiet, unwavering boundary speaks a truth their ego has been dodging. The power they once had over you is gone. A dramatic argument lets them stay in familiar territory. If you explode, cry, scream, list every detail of how they hurt you, while still clearly being emotionally hooked, their ego actually gets a strange kind of comfort. Because beneath all that intensity, they can still feel your attachment. They can say to themselves, they're mad, but they're still in it. They still care this much, they're still here. Drama often gives them proof that the emotional cord between you is intact, even if it's tangled and painful, and many avoidants know unconsciously how to pull you into that storm, saying half-truths, dropping just enough emotion to trigger your hope, then defending themselves in a way that triggers your pain, until you are the one raising your voice, writing essays, pleading to be understood. And they get to walk away telling themselves, see, they're still obsessed, they're still emotional, they're still the one chasing. Their conscience gets to stay half asleep because your reaction looks like the old pattern, and they can hide the reality of what they did under the noise of how you reacted. A clean no refuses to give them that cover. It doesn't give them a scene to point at. It gives them a mirror. When you say something like, I hear that you regret what happened, and I genuinely wish you healing, but I'm not willing to go back into that dynamic. And then you stop there. You don't argue. You don't try to convince. You don't send follow-up paragraphs. You don't keep engaging in circles. Your composure forces them to feel the weight of their own choices without being able to dilute it with your overreaction. Your calm no exposes the reality they've been running from, that they did not just temporarily upset you, they permanently changed where they stand in your life. That echo of your no follows them into the quiet moments, because it is not loud in volume, it is loud in truth. They remember the way you used to fight for them, how you'd show up at the slightest hint that you might lose them. And now they are faced with the version of you who can love them and still choose yourself, who can hear their apology and still decline the offer, who can see their regret and still protect your peace. And that is what unsettles their conscience long after the conversation ends. The realization that the spell they once held over you is broken for good. It's not about making them suffer. It's about refusing to suffer again on their terms. It's about letting your no be an act of loyalty to your healing rather than a weapon against them. And whether they ever admit it to you or not, that simple, steady boundary will stay with them, because it will forever mark the moment they learned that your love was never their entitlement. It was a privilege. And once they mishandled it enough times, that privilege was revoked, quietly, firmly, and with a self-respect that they cannot unsee. Their ego doesn't really crack when you cry, or when you beg, or when you send long messages trying to explain the depth of your love and the intensity of your pain. Their ego cracks when they finally look up and realize you didn't stay standing in the exact same spot where they left you, frozen in time, waiting for them to wake up, because that's what they quietly counted on, that no matter how distant they were, how confusing, how inconsistent, you would stay emotionally available, you would keep a place for them in your heart. You would keep your life on pause, just in case they came back ready. And when they return and see that you didn't do that, that you healed, moved forward, and chose yourself, something inside them shatters, not just because they lost you, but because the story they told themselves about who you are and who they are can't survive that reality anymore. They expected you to still be there emotionally, still ready to drop everything for a call, still reading their occasional messages as gospel, still willing to open old wounds just to feel close again. But instead they meet a different version of you, a you who still has a soft heart, yes, but one that is no longer available at the expense of your own sanity, a you who has built a routine that doesn't center them, a you who learned how to sit with loneliness without running back to the person who caused it. And that difference is exactly where their ego breaks, because it proves something they never wanted to admit. They were not the only one with options. They were not the only one capable of walking away, and your love was never as guaranteed as they pretended it was. When they left or pulled away, they told themselves comforting stories that you were too attached, that you'd never move on, that no one would understand them like you, that even if they disappeared you'd still be emotionally tethered, checking in, waiting, hoping. Maybe dating but never really letting anyone in the way you let them in. They needed that belief to feel safe, because it gave them permission to avoid confronting their own behavior. If they believed you would always be there, they didn't have to feel the full weight of what they were risking. But while they were relying on that fantasy, you were changing. Quietly, painfully, slowly, you were learning to give yourself the validation you'd been begging from them. You were learning to self-soothe instead of over-explaining. You were learning that peace in your nervous system is not a luxury, but a requirement. And day by day you untied the knot between their inconsistency and your sense of worth. You stopped reading their silence as a verdict on your value and started reading it as a verdict on their readiness. So when they come back expecting to find you where they left you, and instead find you grounded, more selective with your energy, less available for emotional chaos, It confronts them with the truth that your world does not revolve around them anymore. Their messages arrive and you don't drop everything. Their calls come and you don't scramble to make time. Their presence no longer dictates the rhythm of your life, and that's when they feel the crack, because it exposes just how much power they used to have and how completely they squandered it. Your healing is not just your private victory. It is the mirror that shows them what they lost before. Their ego could comfort itself with the idea that you needed them more than they needed you. That you were the emotional one and they were in control, but now they see you choosing yourself in real time, choosing your boundaries, choosing your future, maybe even choosing new connections that actually respect you. And that choice hits them in a place no argument ever could. It shows them, without a single dramatic scene, that love is not a cage you agreed to stay locked in. It was a door you were always free to walk out of, and you finally did. They may try to tell themselves that you've changed in a negative way, that you've become cold or hard, but underneath that narrative is a much more painful truth for them. You have grown into someone who will not hand over your mental health just to soothe their fear of being alone. And they can't undo that growth. They can't teach you the lessons the breakup burned into your skin. What breaks their ego most is that your no is not theatrical, it's calm, your distance is not reactive, it's intentional. You are not punishing them, you're protecting yourself, and that makes it impossible to write you off as bitter or obsessed. They can't minimize you when you're not chasing. They can't paint you as unstable when you're steady. They can't secretly believe you'll always be there when your actions show that you won't. And in that space, they are finally left alone with themselves, with their choices, with the reality that someone who loved them deeply once stood in front of them open and willing. And they were too busy defending their ego to step into it. That is the image that lingers in their mind, long after your last conversation, you walking away not because you stopped loving, but because you started loving yourself more. You not waiting in the same place, but moving on, building a life that no longer orbits their fear, and whether they ever say it out loud or not, that is the moment that changes them. The moment their ego breaks enough to understand that losing you wasn't just unfortunate, it was the predictable outcome of treating someone extraordinary like they would never leave. A clean no with love and firmness will always echo deeper in their conscience than any dramatic argument. Because it is the moment you stop performing for their ego and start standing for your own soul. And that shift is something they cannot hear or see, no matter how hard they try to spin the story in their mind. When you used to argue, cry, plead, explain everything 20 different ways, they might have looked irritated, detached, overwhelmed. But underneath all of that they felt strangely safe, because your intensity still told them one thing: you were in it, you were invested. You were emotionally tied to them. Your whole nervous system was still wrapped around their response. And that meant they still had power. They could walk away from the conversation thinking, they're mad, but they still love me, they still want me, they're not going anywhere, and that belief soothed their ego, even as it shredded you. A clean no, on the other hand, removes that safety blanket. It doesn't come from the version of you who is begging to be chosen. It comes from the version of you who has already chosen yourself, and that energy is completely different. It sounds like, I hear you. I understand you regret it, but I'm not willing to go back into that. Or, I forgive you, but I'm not available to repeat that story. You're not yelling, you're not attacking, you're not trying to convince. You are simply stating a boundary and then honoring it with your behavior. And that calm finality is exactly what shakes them. because there is no chaos to hide behind anymore, only consequence. When you say no from this place, you are not making a scene they can later use to blame you. You're not giving them an emotional out. You're not giving them the ability to point and say, "See, this is why it never worked. They're too emotional, too dramatic, too reactive." You deny them the old narrative they depended on. Instead, they're left with something far more confronting: the quiet awareness that you had every reason to say yes, every reason to go back, every reason to be pulled in by history, chemistry, and love, and you still didn't, because their behavior cost more than their presence was worth. That lands differently in the nervous system than a fight. It lands as a truth they have to carry alone, because they can't soothe themselves with, "We're both toxic," or "They're just crazy." Your calm no removes the noise and leaves only the simple fact that you are no longer willing to participate in the pattern they feel comfortable in. And that is where real regret is born. Not the shallow regret of, "I miss your attention," but the deep regret of, "I misused something precious and lost it for real." This kind of no is loving, because it doesn't need to humiliate or punish them. You can acknowledge the good. You can validate that what you had was real. You can even say, "I care about you and genuinely wish you well," and still be absolutely unwavering about your boundary. There is a softness in your tone and a steel in your decision, and that combination makes your choice even harder to dismiss. They can't label you bitter when you're not throwing insults. They can't call you vindictive when you're not trying to hurt them back. All they're left with is the recognition that you are choosing your peace over their potential, your reality over their promises, your healing over their hunger. And as time passes and you stick with that no, you don't reopen the door during lonely nights. You don't respond to every breadcrumb they send. You don't let nostalgia drag you into the same emotional maze. The echo of that boundary gets louder in their mind, because it becomes undeniable evidence that the dynamic has permanently shifted. They are no longer the one who decides when and how the story continues. You are. For you, this clean no is not about winning. It's about finally stepping out of a cycle that taught your body to live in anxiety. It's about respecting the scars you carry from all the times you tried to make it work with someone who could not or would not meet you. It's about telling the wounded part of you, "I will not send you back into that fire just because the person who lit it is shivering now." And for them, it is the first time they truly have to sit with the full weight of what they lost. No dramatic ending to distract them, no explosive fight to fixate on, no messy exchange they can use as proof that it was dysfunctional anyway. Just the memory of someone who loved them deeply, looked them in the eye, and said a gentle, unwavering no. That moment will stay with them far longer than any speech you could give, not because you shattered them, but because you finally stopped letting them shatter you. And whether they ever tell you or not, that is the moment their old power over you dies, and your power over your own life, your own heart, and your own future truly begins.